Hey everyone, I've got a special edition of Around the Block today. I'm here at the Singapore FinTech Festival with Jeremy Allaire. Jeremy is the co-founder and CEO of Circle, and they're the co-creator of the USD coin, one of the most popular stable coins out there. We had a wide-ranging conversation on a whole bunch of topics, so I'll turn it now over to my discussion with Jeremy Allaire.
This is awesome. We don't get to be together in person very often, and
Yep.
and being able to do it all the way around the world here is kind of cool.
I agree. We do almost all of our meetings over video, but this is like, I always joke with people, this is the highest resolution video call we're going to do for a while.
Yeah,
so.
it is. It is. It's really good. Obviously, there's just like tons we can talk about and themes. I think, I actually want to start with just like a very high level theme, which is like kind of moving from the speculative value phase to the utility value phase of crypto. Right now is a really interesting moment because like so much infrastructure has been built. There's just so much there, stepping back 10 years, right? I think as we look and say, wow, look how far this has come. It's amazing, but we're still like really early. And we have maybe a few 100 million people who are touching this. It's still a small part of the world. Obviously, we all believe it's going to be everyone in the world eventually, but what do you think are the most important problems to be solving for kind of moving to more utility value in crypto today?
Yeah, well, you're right. So we always kind of thought about it as crypto going through these three phases of, it would start off as primarily an investment use case, and then it would move to, different types of financial services, borrowing and lending and remittance and earning money and commerce. And then it would move to even non-financial service things like Web3 and the decentralized apps. And we're seeing that now with decentralized identity and social and gaming and all these DAOs, new types of things.
Experiments and all these things, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the things that'll the big unlocks to help that happen even faster. It's already happening today, as you've mentioned, and we actually track some of that internally at Coinbase. Like, what % of our active users are doing something other than trading? Mm-hmm. And it's now more than 50%, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just one thing that they're doing; it's like a bunch of little things, right? They're using like their Coinbase card and Coinbase, they're earning money with crypto, doing peer-to-peer payments, like commerce, right? So staking and yield and all these things have become bigger and bigger. So we're seeing that transition already happen. It's more than 50% of our active users. And I think the way we get it to be even bigger, or the next big unlocks, one of them, it's got to be regulatory clarity, right? Yep. That's one I know you've worked super hard on all over the world. And if we can, a lot of the institutional investors I talk to, for instance, they all say, we've got 1% of our portfolio in crypto. And I say, what would it take to get it to 20 or 30? And they say, regulatory clarity, regulatory clarity. Yeah. It's all, the whole ball game is regulatory clarity. And so
we can come back to that theme, obviously. It's a big theme,
Yeah, and so that's a big one. And then the other one is, scalability of the blockchains.
Totally.
Depends who you talk to. Some people feel like the blockchains are scalable now and we need the apps. And I kind of feel
DSL.
like, yeah. Or it's like when the internet first got going and had all this fiber optic infrastructure. And anyway, I feel like getting another order of magnitude of scalability in the blockchains would just unlock all these use cases.
I use the example of, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's
like the example of like, we're going from dial-up to broadband.
Yeah.
And like, yes, like these third generation chains that are kind of out there now, right? They have X thousand TPS, et cetera. But when you think about like Web3 and the kinds of apps and the kinds of things that people want to do, like we don't have the pipes, right? And I think broadband is an interesting analogy because it is about throughput basically, and at the end of the day, and how many bits you can move. But this is sort of about kind of how much kind of shared state can exist on these compute platforms. But we're still like, like when broadband came, right? It was originally just, DSL. It was like, not really. It was like 5 times faster than a dial-up modem. Yeah. And then eventually, enough got there where almost any app could kind of happen over that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But sorry, that was like one infrastructure scaling. Yes. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, those are the two big ones. And I don't know, if I had to pick a third one, it's probably just the usability, right? Like right now today with Web3 and all these use cases, it's actually amazing how much adoption Web3 has gotten, given how difficult it is to use. Right. But a lot of times people they'll buy crypto on an exchange, then they'll move it to a self-custodial wallet, which is often a Chrome extension. Totally. Right there, you've lost most of the world.
The funnel, when you think about the funnel, right?
Most people in the world don't use Chrome extensions except nerds like us.
Right.
And then you've got to figure out how to connect your wallet. Yes, you might lose the funds. there's all these, oftentimes you have to like bridge your funds to
Yeah.
another layer too. And so we've just got to make it way, way, way simpler.
Right.
So the usability,
Yeah.
I think, it's got to just be like, you want to buy that, you click a buy button and it all magically
Yeah,
works
yeah.
somehow.
Like a lot of people often say like, crypto reaches mainstream when people don't know they're using crypto, right?
Yeah.
And I think not exactly sure what that means, but clearly like that user experience layer, I agree about that. It's such a huge hurdle for people, and going back to like early examples of iterations on the internet, right? My last company was digital media, and like media was like browser plugins. It was like you wanted to stream a video, you had to go get either the Windows media player, or the Real player, or the QuickTime player, and it was like all these different codecs, and they're constantly upgrading, and it was awful. It was like truly awful, but people were really excited about it, and there was actually a lot of streaming, but you eventually needed like kind of either common standards that then all the clients could implement that then made that work. And we're not quite there, but maybe we'll get there if Apple and Google and people who control client operating systems actually build some of the crypto primitives into their OSs. That could help.
Yeah, that would help.
Yeah. And maybe we'll get there on that in the next, few years.
Yeah, that'll be a very interesting question if crypto companies actually need to go build their own hardware, like phones and laptops and VR headsets, or if the current generation of those companies will actually embrace it. I think they're all a little bit, there's people inside all these big companies that are thinking about crypto and are very pro-crypto, but sometimes the leadership is ambivalent or it's just not their highest priority, and so you get kind of waffling, and it'll be interesting to see if like a dedicated crypto phone can actually push that whole situation forward.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing experiments like that. If you look at like what Apple is doing and Google and others, but like, they have their wallet and it has like identity and entitlements, and they're trying to kind of layer in these other things that are kind of closed loop to their environment. And like you can see like NFTs as entitlement mechanisms and crypto primitives as mechanisms for identity, and all of those could be standardized on an open infrastructure, and it's sort of like the pre-internet standards era, that is in some of these spaces, but crypto's kind of finding its way. And I like to think once it's clearly, a whole set of use cases that go beyond, in say if I'm an Apple product lead, like beyond like this is just about Bitcoin, or in people's minds it's super simplistic, right? And it's actually like this is actually important internet infrastructure. So one of the things I'm interested to hear your take on is like over the medium to long term, this sort of shift from kind of entities that exist in real life to kind of entities that exist on chain. And it's one of the things I'm most excited about in terms of like long-term growth is the idea that labor and capital can construct mechanisms to work together that are truly global, that are transparent and auditable, and kind of can exist entirely on chain. DAOs is sort of the word people use for a lot of these, but not all of these are going to be autonomous nor totally decentralized, but let's just call them DAOs for now. But like on-chain entities in a sense. And I know you guys have experimented a little bit with that in terms of stuff out in the ecosystem, but interested to hear your take on how significant you think that can be and how much of a growth driver that can be to the kind of crypto economy over the long run.
Yeah, well, I like how you framed it as better organization of capital and labor. We're here in Singapore, which is, I'm really passionate about this idea of economic freedom, and the mission of Coinbase is to increase economic freedom. And so Singapore, if you look at the rankings of the world, is actually the number one highest economic freedom country in the world right now. If you look at the 2022 rankings on Wikipedia, but based on various organizations that rank these things. So that was kind of what made this place so prosperous was property rights and rule of law and free trade and all these things that allowed capital and labor to come together in unison and just make better, high quality products at cheaper prices. And even with very few natural resources, they became this incredibly wealthy country. So in a way, it's like crypto is trying to bring that prosperity story to more and more countries around the world. And I do think DAOs are a really big deal. They're a huge part of this puzzle. I love DAOs. I'm super bullish on it. I think, so it's a very broad term, and people go through various ups and downs, just like in any new innovation in crypto, where DeFi will take off and then it'll have a winter or whatever. So DAOs have kind of gone through some of these as well. Look, the bugs need to get worked out in the smart contracts. It'd be nice if we had better tools around, anybody could sort of go and create a DAO, manage to do governance through voting and all this stuff should get super simple.
Kind of functions of an organization and make that more like a SaaS product, but all executed safely on chain.
Even like payroll and people. So there's another weird thing which I think people need to figure out with DAOs, and we probably need to do our part on this too. But some DAOs I've seen actually, they turn into like collectives, which is almost like designed by committee or whatever. And I don't think that's the right model. Companies always are thinking about this too, right? And in theory, you have like
flat hierarchy, divisions, P&Ls.
And just generally the standard model is like you have one CEO who can make the call and move forward, so you don't have just endless deadlock and debate and everything. But maybe you have a board that creates governance over that, and so anyway, I think people. The good news about DAOs is there's going to be like a lot of variance in different models that people experiment with. So it's not just, DAOs are not just one thing. I do think there's some projects that have kind of default made the DAO sort of like this committee or a commune thing, and that's I think that's probably not going to work if I had to guess. But who knows? I could be wrong.
I look at it as like this is the first time, like if you go back to the 1800s. And you had joint stock corporations is this sort of thing that gets a common pattern, and then in some ways like banking and capital markets laddered off of that in some ways. And so, but now like we have this creative surface of you have an entity and you have participants and you can have contractual interactions and economic coordination, and all of those things can start to happen. And it's like it's a space for radical experimentation, right? And like I'm interested in just sort of seeing, ideally, like a lot of different ways people try and organize these things, and hopefully like there's like a legal binding, like so there's enough that like they can pay taxes or whatever, or can connect to labor laws if there are labor laws that they need to connect to. But so there's that hybrid kind of thing, kind of like a stable coin. It's like this real world thing that's connected to an on-chain thing, but I sort of imagine a lot of experimentation, and I think corporate forms, like yes, there's been a lot of work on corporate forms, but kind of these new global internet native corporate forms, like it's really a new thing, and distributed work and everything else kind of plays into that. So I'm likewise super bullish about it, and just curious to hear how you were thinking about it too.
Yeah, I'm curious. There's certain jurisdictions I think have tried to lean into this, like Wyoming did something, which I think is really smart. It could, like most C corps in the U.S. are in Delaware. So like I feel like Wyoming made this like really smart move. And I talked to some of the leaders in Wyoming, and I was like, how did that come about? And they were like, honestly, it was this one guy, and he had this crazy idea, and we all didn't really quite understand it. But we were like, sure, try it out. And I was like, sometimes it's the funniest ways that these things happen. But I don't know. Do you have any? I'm still trying to think about, like, I'm curious your thoughts. How will, DAOs are supposed to handle the court system or whatever is supposed to be handled on chain, and we've seen some of them that have resolved that successfully with votes. But I'm still trying to think about what is the tie-in back to the real world. Like if you need to go to some Wyoming court or something, what's the situation? I don't know. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, like I think like clearly. A couple things. I mean, these entities need to be able to contract with other legal entities, right? So I think that's a really key thing, because it's not going to be viable that it's so self-contained that all products and services are entirely in that on-chain world. And so I feel like there is that kind of root kind of connectivity that has to be there. And so, LLCs, or other kind of corporate structures can exist and or can kind of be bound like this. I mean, Wyoming DAO is kind of like that, but I think other governments are sort of saying, hey, you could have an on-chain entity that does these things. I mean, I think the contracts that they enter into that are off-chain contracts, then you have dispute resolution through that. And then I think there's interesting work that can be done in terms of on-chain dispute resolution. There's like Claros, I don't know if you've looked at that, which is kind of a decentralized arbitration system that exists entirely on-chain. And I mean, it's fairly early in its development. There was the Aragon Court, right, which attempted to do something like this as well. So I feel like those kinds of experiments could continue, and you could actually see like durable kind of arbitration mechanisms to deal with what are kind of provable on-chain activities and contracts and things like that. That's
cool. Yeah, it makes sense. You kind of need that. Maybe at least in the intermediate stage, you need that connectivity back into the legacy, system of paper and records and whatever to sort of interface with non-DAO entities. Yeah. But you're right, more and more of it could go on chain with these kind of arbitration courts and stuff. That'd be super cool. Yeah. So it's an interesting one. Maybe want to pivot to talk about kind of lending and in particular. This sort of concept of maybe stepping back, like I have this theory and relates to stablecoins actually, which is the total addressable market for stablecoins, kind of full reserve type stablecoins that we're looking at. I think of it as just M2 electronic money. Mm-hmm. So that's like $100 trillion. So it's a big market. But when you actually break that down, like the vast majority of that M2 money is actually kind of leveraged capital, meaning it's deposits that then are kind of, there's a money multiplier, and that's the fractional reserve system that is basically kind of playing out loans on the deposit base. And if you really want to compete with M2 money, you have to like create credit intermediation. And so credit intermediation, today there's like ways that happens, and we have credit intermediation on chain, but it's mostly like leveraged capital, meaning it's margin borrowing and things like that. And so I think the really interesting problem becomes when can on-chain methods provide unsecured forms of credit intermediation or different levels of security. And there's like DeFi projects that are experimenting with this today that are interesting, but it kind of gets to this, it ties into DAOs, and like if there's an organization that actually has its treasury on chain, well then you can actually see, a lot about its financial health, and then you could underwrite it, right? And so, oracleized data is another way to do that, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, as you think about the future of lending on blockchains, what do you think in terms of that kind of the role that blockchains play in broader credit facilitation? Well, I hadn't thought about it in terms of the M2 money supply and how that can expand. And there may be I bet you've thought about that actually a lot more than I have. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts. The main thing I've just been thinking about in terms of credit, in terms of what these on-chain protocols can unlock and lending, is that today a lot of these lending marketplaces are just so constrained into one country or to one type of person. Totally. And look, inside each of these, I'm sure there were reasonable reasons why these things were created, but the net effect of it is that just there's not equal access to credit globally at all, right? I remember I spent a year living in Argentina, and I was kind of surprised to learn there that people can't get mortgages for their house. Yeah. It just the credit market is just not developed there, and so the net effect of it is that wealthy people who can pay cash for a house, like they own property, and then most, like 99% of people don't own property. They can only rent their whole life, right? And so it's basically keeping them more in poverty. Real estate is a big way that people build their wealth. It's the same thing, if you wanted to build a global lending marketplace, you'd have to go not only to all states in the US, but all these 200 countries around the world. It's sort of silly. I mean, why can't I make a loan to someone in India or or in Brazil or whatever? It's very silly to me. So I think that just in terms of human potential and like economic growth and everything, a global credit marketplace would completely unlock that. And that's part of what DeFi is trying to do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, 100% agree. I often use the concept of long tail capital markets, and like the internet's really good at long tail markets, right? Long tail advertising with Google AdWords and long tail transportation coordination with Uber and kind of long tail content, long tail e-commerce, right? Like anyone who has a product that they make in any part of the world can find a buyer, and there's a logistics platform, and it's sort of the specialization and so on. But we don't have long tail capital markets. Like that, like we have the Russell 2000, which is like not quite like a long, I mean, that's on the equity side, right? But clearly that's like the promise. And I think one of the challenges with DeFi today is, at least in its current incarnation, is so much of that credit market that's there is sort of, it's really still tied to, people who want to borrow long or short, or go short or borrow long on an investment, which is an important form of like funding and everything else. But when we kind of get to the use cases that you're talking about, like where there's people with property or people who have needs, and ultimately kind of getting to a place where there's long tail underwriting in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Where you can kind of have that be surfaced to on-chain systems that can provide the right kind of decisioning.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I've thought about a little bit is just, now that decentralized identity is becoming bigger with ENS and these other protocols, there should be probably some kind of FICO score equivalent for an ENS, right? And especially if you can look at attestations on that account, the history of that account, maybe it's received payroll from a DAO, or you and I have sent, and you have a reputation. It's basically like a Google PageRank type algorithm on the graph structure of the transactions.
Yes.
And I haven't looked into this too deeply, but I'm a little surprised we haven't seen like a reputation score, FICO score, decentralized protocol emerge. That's probably something that needs to get built.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely projects that are experimenting with that, and I think again, this kind of I have this idea of these kind of hybrids that there's sort of a pure on-chain version of things, and then there's the kind of off-chain thing that you need to link to, and identity is one of those, right? Because we need like proof that I am who I say I am, and like you guys do that for a living, right? With people, and like these kind of root elements that are kind of, there's a trusted intermediary or a statutory obligation at least, or whatever it is that society has sort of said, yeah, I'm going to trust the government to issue an ID, or I'm going to trust a financial institution as an intermediary to verify these IDs, and sort of the credentialing kind of those root credentials can kind of come. But then when you attach that to, things like on-chain, then you can decorate it with a lot of other kind of data that then makes like richer forms of decisioning really possible. But I'd be interested, I know you guys have recently done Coinbase ID and built on ENS, and sort of you're starting to progress into that, and kind of what do you envision over the next couple of years becoming possible at scale?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about ENS and decentralized identity generally, and not just that standard. There's a variety of them, but so we wanted to make it easy, first of all, for people to kind of get one for free, right? So they didn't have to go and buy it. So, we basically made, like jeremy.cb.id, or anybody basically claim a username .cb.id, and because it has kind of I don't know what you'd call it, like a prefix on it. We were able to kind of get the cb.id root name or whatever. So we wanted to make that easy for anybody to claim, but of course people want to have customized names too, and we want to make it possible for them to buy those easily. And right now I think they can just transfer it in if they want, but so there's should be a marketplace for those, and people should auction them off. And I think there's going to be a variety of decentralized identity standards too, and maybe more we can work on there over time. But
for sure,
I think, look, that's a very fun foundational piece, because today, it's for so many reasons. Today we're sending money to a random string of characters. It's like an IP.
Back to the UX issue.
Yeah. So is it human readable or machine readable? These are all machine readable, just like IP addresses. But then we got domain names, right? And we got email addresses. So that feels like a foundational thing. I should be sending it always to a human readable name. It should have a reputation score, the decentralized thing attached to it. I should probably be able to go to look at that profile page for that name. Maybe even see things that the person wants to be public, right? Ideally, you wouldn't want to have everything public right now. That's another issue, that some private, some public. But you should be able to go there and see, maybe post decentralized social media posts you've made, or NFTs that you own, attestations like credentials, degrees that you've gotten,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Endorsements, whatever. So even POAPs, right? Like the proof of attendance, where we could both, Jeremy went to the Singapore FinTech Festival, whatever.
Yeah. It feels like this is like one of those space. It's like, the internet wanted a standard for money, and the internet wanted a standard for identity, and like, I think crypto infrastructure is finally giving us the ability to create those. And I think it also feels to me like one of these spaces where, standards are going to be super important, right? Because identity, unless it's like really broadly interoperable and everybody sort of says yes, I'm on it. And this is like a chicken and egg problem, right? It's like how many people have had ideas for digital identity that are just like they're stovepipes, right? They're sort of stuck. But feels like we have a shot now in a way that hasn't existed ever before, at least on the internet, to potentially solve this.
Yeah, well, to me, the key unlock is that, I don't want to have a digital identity managed by one company.
Right.
I want to have an identity that's operates in some, decentralized manner that I control it, but I know that no one person could shut me off. There's all these issues with like censorship and everything. So
it needs to be self-sovereign.
Yeah.
Even if some of the credentials that you bring to it are given from someone else, right?
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Yeah, the state of the art of identity verification today for Coinbase and all these different countries and most companies is literally taking photos of pieces of paper the government gave you, right?
Yeah.
And it's so crazy. I mean, places like India have done a really good job with like India Stack and UPI, and actually turn a lot of these into APIs with biometrics.
Yeah.
Somehow that happened in India, which is like an incredible achievement. But every other country in the world basically is nowhere near that. And so I think crypto can help just advance this whole state forward. And okay, we'll have some connections to the legacy stuff, but I think eventually your DID will be more important, not because you linked some government piece of paper to it, but because it's been participating in all these transactions and it has an online reputation. And that's almost more important. And I think it's probably better for the world if every human could have multiple of these. Like, you might have multiple different accounts on different services, and it doesn't. The government wants you to have one ID per person, but I think there's a world that's probably better for humanity, where you have you're one for public stuff, and you have you're one for if you're an activist or dissident or whatever. Like you need to have different profiles. So
and the kind of productivity experience. Productivity is maybe the wrong word, but like the UX around how to do that, like clearly hasn't been solved yet, but clearly will be, right? It's cool. Identity is like, there's sort of these like multi-sided coins, no pun intended, but like identity and privacy are kind of have an interplay with each other, and then identity, privacy, and regulation all have like a play against each other, and we see kind of guidelines that come through around things like self-custody wallets, and what level of identification is necessary for people to make transfers to those, and what's the perimeter of kind of privacy preserved transactions, and so policy, identity, privacy are like three sides of the same coin. I don't know if that works, but but like there's this interplay there, and I know you've been really passionate about these topics. I know we've both, like when the Mnuchin tried to do what he did, it was like kind of we were all like ready to sue the government. But like unpack that a little bit, like that interplay on those issues, and coming back to your core mission of economic freedom, and a lot of times like there's sort of a looking back, like this is how it works, but now there's a looking forward, like there's new possibilities. What are those new possibilities, in particular around identity, privacy, and economic freedom, and kind of then how do we convince policymakers to kind of enable that world? That's a big question.
Yeah, very big question. So let's see. I mean, I think there's this fundamental tension, right? Is like nobody wants to see a technology used by bad people to do bad things. But you also don't want to, my rough mental model is like 1% of the people in the world are doing bad things and 99% of people are basically good people trying to do the right thing. And so you don't want to harm the 99% even a little bit just to get a leg up on the 1%, right?
Yeah.
And there's some pretty, I think it was it the IMF or the World Bank, someone like that put out a report on AML efforts globally, and it was not great. I mean, it was there's an enormous cost to society.
And 99% goes undetected. Or
it was something, I think it was like 1 or 2% of illicit funds were actually frozen due to all AML efforts globally.
Right.
And at an enormous cost, not just to innovation, but literally
to society. To real economies, to people.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I, we have large portions of our employee bases are working on these things. So I think that's something really serious that people need to look at. Look, I think a lot of the work, the literal practical thing to do is, it's like, and you've done a great job of this, is basically show up and talk to policymakers. It's not like, on Twitter the debate can lose all nuance, but in my experience, 95% of them are well-intentioned, smart people who want to do the right thing for society, and their mind is split across 100 different things. This is just one thing they're trying to grapple with. And so it takes people showing up and just talking through the issues, explaining it. I do think 95% of the time our default stance is to work with government on good solutions, but 5% of the time, if we see something bad coming down that's being proposed, that's misguided, or we think is a line that would be terrible for the industry, then we are going to stand up and, we're not afraid to fund lawsuits. And, this is, it's not like a hostile thing or whatever,
the stakes are high for society and the economy and like what the future world is. And you can have high conviction about it.
And that's what the courts are there to help us resolve. So anyway, I think, just to take Singapore as one example, right? I think they've been very welcoming. They're actually some of the most sophisticated financial regulators in the world, I think.
Totally.
And both Circle and Coinbase have gotten these kind of in principle approvals for hopefully a path to a license, which is great. I think they've done a really good job kind of welcoming institutional business here. Stablecoin regulations seem to be making progress. You may tell me if you feel otherwise. But they haven't been as forthcoming, I think, on a couple areas. One is around self-custodial wallets, and then the retail market for trading. They seem to be hesitating on, we don't think retail should be trading this stuff. And that's an area where I do think Singapore risks not having the right stance right now. I mean, we're seeing like Hong Kong, for instance, coming out and saying, actually,
we're going to do retail.
Retail trading. Retail users need access to this, to these crypto assets, not just for trading, although that's one piece of it. It's to start to access all of Web3 and to be able to earn money and do remittance.
Like the internet. It's sort of like saying you can't use the internet.
I think any kind of approach, like if Singapore takes this approach of like, all right, we're going to allow these pieces, but not these pieces, that's not going to work, I don't think, in crypto, and it's not going to allow Singapore to be the financial hub it deserves to be as this leader in economic freedom. And I think on self-custodial wallets, like just to touch on that one, for instance, look, my personal view is if you're not storing customer money, you're not a financial service business and you shouldn't be regulated like one. Obviously, both of our companies, we do store customer funds. We are regulated like financial service businesses. But I think that's a really dangerous place to get to if you're going to say, all right, anybody just hosting a website or building, the browser equivalent or whatever now needs to get it tied up in financial services regulation. I think that's going to kill a lot of the innovation. And the thing that some regulators I think don't realize is that it's not like the citizens in your country aren't going to use it. They're still going to do it. They're just going to go, use overseas like unregulated options. So you're not protecting them by saying we're just allowing it. You're just pushing it offshore. So anyway, that's a tough one to grapple with.
Yeah, it is, and I think it gets even tougher when. I was sitting down with a senior government official recently, and the view of this technology is actually really colored by the presumption that like a blockchain's only purpose is to like transfer money, and it's like no. I had to like step back and say like. These are basically like general purpose internet operating systems, and they're solving a set of problems with data and transactions and software that the internet hasn't solved before. And it's like a whole new environment for a new class of problems that can be solved that are really important. Some of which are like very, very consumer, some of which are very useful to the healthcare industry or whatever it is. And like, you have to really step back and realize that this isn't all just about, kind of regulating the storage and movement of funds, right?
Yeah.
And so if you inadvertently sort of put policies in place that kind of cap what you're able to do with this, like these internet operating systems, like that's a real problem. And it was a little bit of a light bulb moment, you know, like, oh God, like this is way bigger than I realized. And like I liken it to, you know, during the some of the growth phases of the prior phases of the internet, where, you know, everyone kind of got comfortable with the idea that there's an open internet and there's these open networks, and, you know, if you have a piece of software and a computer that's connected to it, you can kind of do whatever that software allows you to do, and people would build services that would, you know, enable free publishing, and you know, and people would build services to do peer-to-peer communications, like messaging apps and communications apps, and all these things kind of grew up. And one instinct was like, well, that's a telecommunications service. We should, like, it should have all the same things that happen with the telephone system, or, you know, that's actually a radio broadcast that you're doing. Well, you should have all the same licenses that you do to, like, put up a radio tower or whatever. Right. And so the initial mapping of, like, regulatory frameworks to open internet, it happened, but then it kind of like faded away, because what happened is society was like, no, this is way better. Like, we really like this. And and then policymakers ultimately responded and were like, okay, we can live with the fact that people can have encrypted communications. Now, there are parts of law enforcement that don't like that and fight that, but, like, broadly, society's like, yeah, this is a value, right? We want to preserve that. Or they, you know, kind of, you know, we're like, okay, there's YouTube, and, like, terrorists can put recruiting videos on YouTube, and yeah, there's a process to, like, find them and take them down, but, like, we're not going to ban YouTube, because, like, people want freedom of publishing information, and so
imagine if you had to get a license before you could put a video up.
Right. I mean, well, that's
from, like, who? What agency?
Yeah. I mean, that was like I joked that I remember, because in the mid '90s I was working on some of this stuff, and it was like, the big proposal was, like, to build a website, you'd need an FCC license. And it was like, okay, hold on. You know, it's like, and that was, like, a legitimate discussion in Congress. Yeah. And I feel like we're kind of in a similar place with this world of the internet of value, right? And totally. and in some ways, like, if we keep building this and we keep making the kind of progress that's being made, then, like, firms and households will say, no, I don't want you to, like, this is better. Like, you can't take this away from me. Right. And that's, at the end of the day, like, policy is the will of the people, right? Yeah. And so we gotta make a lot of progress.
I totally agree. Society went through that big shift with, like, encryption was a scary word. Oh my gosh, if you're using encryption, you're a terrorist, whatever. And then now, you know, with WhatsApp and Signal and, like, this thing is running the whole world.
Or the iPhone itself, like, you know, this is my private device, right?
Yeah. So encryption is not a bad word. It's like more of, like, a fundamental right to privacy that we want everyone to have. So I agree. It seems like the same story playing out again. And it is, you know, you always have to watch out for someone's, like, fear-based instinct to sort of like restrict something, and then you harm, like, the 99% as much as the 1% of bad people. So
Maybe last question, because we could go on forever and ever. But it's actually related, which is, you know, public chains and things like stablecoins and Bitcoin itself, right, are kind of expressions of, you know, money that exists at internet scale and that are inherently global, but monetary systems are so rooted in kind of territories, and in sort of fiscal policy and taxation and other things, like, in these territories, but. You know, Esther Dyson, one of the early thinkers on the internet, coined the phrase, like, information wants to be free, which is sort of behind the kind of open source movement and all of this. But, like, does like economic value exchange want to be free, in the sense of, like, you know, inherently it's like that the world will tend towards that. But it really does challenge monetary sovereignty. And you're now starting to like see, like, major governments, you know, get really concerned about that. Like, wait a minute, like, they could see a world in a few years where it's like, what just happened? And there is this kind of monetary sovereignty discussion, and how do you think some of that plays out?
Oh man. Well, okay, look, I think the most important like kind of near term and medium term thing is, every major government pretty much is going to want to have a central bank digital currency, or I think, in the US's case, it's going to end up using USDC as sort of like a de facto CDBC. They'll basically set up policy.
Regulated fiat digital currency, basically.
Yeah. And so that's great. Like there should be clear regulatory frameworks, audits, and all that stuff. And then, boom, now we have a way to have a wrapper around fiat money, and they still control the money supply and all that. So it's like, it's fun. First of all, it's just work with the current system.
Totally.
But I agree with you. I think as the crypto economy continues to grow, and today it's a small percentage of global GDP, but it's similar to, again, look at e-commerce, right? E-commerce 1999 was like nothing, and now it's like 15 or almost 20% of global GDP, I think, and during COVID it grew a lot. And so what happens if, in another 10 years we go by and it's like the crypto economy is 20% of global GDP? Okay, well, it wouldn't be very inclusive to use the currency of one sovereign nation inside the global system.
Right.
And so I do think there could end up being a world where there is a more transnational currency that's being used. And honestly, that would probably be more fair in the sense that there's not like some small number of people with their fingers on the dials who could change it too much. Now, what exactly that'll look like, I mean, look, I think Bitcoin is an incredible gold standard. Some economists would argue that and I think it's really important to have a gold standard. Some economists would argue that you actually want to have like a slight inflation rate to get something to encourage people to spend it. The
price stability.
Yeah. So I don't know. You could imagine a version of a coin out there that was more tied to like CPI or just a flat 2% inflation rate or something like that. I think the crypto economy basically could come up with a better form of like a transactional currency that's superseded, or it might just be a basket of fiat currencies or things like that. So I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but I do think that it would be a very good thing for the world. I don't know. What do you think?
I totally agree. I mean, I think it's a legit problem space, and I think like the forces of this technology and this system growing are going to lead to I sort of think of it as like synthetic forms of global digital currency that could actually have a meaningful peg against something like a Bitcoin as well, or have a ratio that's there that's then kind of, so you have a sound money kind of basis, but you also have something that is a more kind of stable unit of account, and that maybe has tie-ins to the biggest fiat currencies. And so definitely a space to experiment.
Yeah. I mean, it may end up being a little bit of like an unbundling of the services that you really want from a government. And, we talked about the court system and DAOs, and we talked about the monetary system. And then, I think this is where you eventually get to network states, which is, totally. I know you met with Balaji here as well, but as usual, Balaji is 10 years, 130
years.
Yeah, he's ahead of all of us, but I think that's a pretty plausible theory about where things will go, but that could take 20, 50 years, I don't know.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This has been a really great conversation. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you for everything you're doing on the policy front, especially, and just driving forward USDC.
Today's conversation is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or investment advice. Actual results may vary materially from any forward-looking statements made and are subject to risks and uncertainties.